Welcome to Rudy Giuliani's Common Sense. This is another episode, and this is a very important one. We're going to summarize the state of the evidence at this point against the Biden crime family. It's really mounted up since the disclosures of the emails and texts and photographs of Hunter Biden. And now things that were proven by witnesses, documents, and videotapes that were ignored and lied about by the press are now proven by Hunter Biden's own words. Let me assure you that this is his hard drive. It was given to my lawyer by the gentleman who had repaired it. It had been left behind by, he says, a drunken Hunter Biden who came in and had a very hard time even signing and did describe what he wanted. He came back one time to supply a keyboard. And then after it was repaired, he never returned, even though there was substantial notices to return. After a while, when the gentleman heard things on the news suggesting that the Bidens may or may not have been involved in criminal activity, he became very concerned that possibly he was holding, some kind of illegal material. So it was now his property, according to the contract signed by Hunter Biden, which we have right here. The property was abandoned, and property that's abandoned under the law becomes the property of the person that's in possession of it. So he had every right to listen to what was there and look at what was there, and he was shocked. What he saw, he says, were clear evidence of crime, clear evidence that the Bidens were lying over and over again. And then on the photographs, clear evidence of criminal activity and some activity that I probably would have a hard time describing and really should be left to more private discussion. In short, what the photographs display is a Hunter Biden who is a very serious, I would say, degenerate crack addict. What that means is he doesn't get rehabilitated. When he goes into rehabilitation, there are even pictures of him going out at night and smoking crack. So it looks like all during the period of time we're talking about when he was making millions and millions and millions of dollars, there would be pictures of him sitting in a closet, smoking dope or engaged in sex while smoking crack with the woman, sometimes on his own. It proves without any doubt that none of this money was intended for Hunter Biden, because nobody would pay this guy $10. I mean, you couldn't be sure if you gave him $10 to go get a bottle of milk for you, he'd come back. So there's no way that some of the biggest criminals in the world are going to be paying him 10 to 14 million or 30 million or investing in a $1.5 billion completely ridiculous private equity fund. So what commodity did Hunter have to sell? That's pretty easy, isn't it? The vice presidency of the United States, which his brother, which his uncle and Joe's younger brother had been doing for the prior 20 years. And that's why this is a crime family. I know their name's not Italian, but crime, this RICO statute applies to political corruption. It applies to white collar crime. I am the first one to really use it to effectively bring down the mafia drug dealers, the Teamsters Union, the Fulton Fish Market, the private carding industry, and then Wall Street. And then after that, United States congressmen and a substantial number of New York City officials and New York State officials, Republican and Democrat. Probably that's what got me elected mayor. I didn't do it for that reason, but that's what made me well known in New York and taught me what was wrong with New York. So I know this statute backwards and forwards, and this is a perfect case for it, because this Biden family was engaging in the business of crime. And their commodity, Joe's public office. And Joe, you will see, shared in the proceeds, which is clearly admitted by his co-conspirators. So let me outline it for you so that you'll be able to follow all of this. And there'll be more than what I'm just saying, but I'm picking, 4 that will get the most prominence. And we're going to focus on when he was vice president of the United States, because that's where the big money was made. before he was vice president of the United States, he made substantial amounts of money through the lobbying of his brothers, the fact that his son had a no-show job for the major bank in Delaware, and Joe Biden was the only Democratic senator that lobbied in favor of banks against easing the bankruptcy laws, because all Democrats were in favor of that. Theoretically, they like to say they represent poor people. Well, Joe was representing the rich bank that was employing his son in a no-show job, which is how his drug addict son began his career, because nobody else would employ him, because he'd be out 2-3 days a week, looking for crack. It's a terrible problem. And I don't mean to pick on Hunter for being an addict. That's a terrible affliction. As a father, I blame Joe Biden. I say to myself, I don't know, if I had a child afflicted by that, wouldn't I take care of them and keep them in rehabilitation? And would I expose them to the most crooked man in the Ukraine, one of the most crooked people in China, to probably the most crooked woman in Russia? Would I do that to a drug addict son just because of greed? I don't know. I think this is Joe Biden's fault. But in any event, I have outlined 4 transactions here. And these are the principal players that we can identify from the analysis we've done so far of the texts and the emails and the photographs. And I have to say, we've analyzed about a quarter of it, because it's very, very extensive. So what you have, very simply, and I'll summarize them really quickly, is, let's call this Joe the point man. Obama was very, very comfortable with that designation, point man. So when we were negotiating to end our role in Iraq, it was really, really critical for the national security interests of the United States that we retain troops there, so that we could keep Iran from basically just creating an extension of the Islamic Republic of Iran's empire. And Joe Biden was sent to do that. Now, that was probably a very foolish decision by President Obama, because Joe Biden honestly had never succeeded at any negotiation ever. Robert Gates, his co-cabinet member in the Obama administration, probably commenting on this and any number of other things, including his opposition to killing bin Laden, said that Joe Biden had never been correct on any matter of foreign policy in his entire life. That's a quote from his fellow cabinet member. Well, he went to Iraq. He was supposed to negotiate this agreement that the Iraqis would allow 10 to 20,000 American troops to stay behind and have immunity from prosecution, so they couldn't get caught in the crossfire between the Sunnis, the Shia, and the other elements there. Of course, he failed. But the Biden crime family came out of it really good, really, really good. James, his brother, who had no experience in housing, was all of a sudden miraculously made part of a $1.5 billion, seems like a convenient number for them, $1.5 billion housing deal in China, in Iraq. And of course, like Hunter, James had no experience in building houses. He was a sleazy lobbyist on K Street. And I say sleazy advisedly because it's all over the newspapers, if you care to ask. And every time it would come up, Joe would say, I don't know my family's business. After a while, that becomes kind of an incredible answer, doesn't it? Well, then, of course, we have the Russian situation. So that's the Iraq situation. The money goes to his brother. And as you will see, about half that money will end up in the pocket of Joe Biden, as well as James will be responsible for some of the Biden family expenses, because Joe didn't pay for much. Thank you for returning to our discussion of the Biden crime family. The second one we have is Russia. Russia is a little cloudy. Don't know it as well. We're just digging it out, but it's quite clear that Hunter Biden received $3.5 million from the wife of the mayor of Moscow, the former mayor of Moscow, since deceased, Batarina. Katerina is quite a character. I mean, she's now considered the wealthiest woman in Russia, probably the most dangerous woman in Russia. She more or less double-crossed her husband to get him out of office and placate Putin. Putin actually might have had a good reason to get rid of her husband, because her husband, who I knew because he was a mayor of Moscow when I was mayor of New York, her husband was really out of control crook. I mean, he was taking money from Putin's friends, not a good idea. So they got him out. She became even closer to Putin as a result of that. So when you think of that $3.5 million, I want you to remember, it's coming from one of Putin's allies. Remember Russian collusion that the Democrats charged the president with? There was no Russian collusion, right? We now know from the Brennan note that Hillary made that up. But even more galling than that, no Republican got any money from Russia. These characters got $3.5 million from Putin's best friend. And the press doesn't care. Press doesn't care. Actually, it's a little more than 3.5 million. It gets closer to about 3.8 because there were 2 laundered payments that I think can be easily proven. And we still don't know why. Because Biden lied about it during the debate when he said there was no such transactions. I don't know if Joe thinks that, he can just say this, and because the press is like sickeningly on his side, as the moderator was, nobody's going to really pay attention to the documents that show the money. But we got them, Joe, and anybody interested in truth and fairness is going to want to see them. So now let's get to the Ukraine, which we've heard a lot about. Probably can summarize that faster than anything. In the Ukraine, Joe Biden was made the point man for the Ukraine. See, every time you become a point man, U.S. loses because Joe can't negotiate properly. And the Biden family gets richer and richer and richer. And that's what happened in the Ukraine. So this big crook in the Ukraine, a pro-Russian Ukrainian who was building up this big oil and gas business corruptly while he was a minister of government, giving it to his own company. When the government fell, when the pro-Russian government fell, he had to run away. He ran away with $5 billion and control of the company, which he controlled from Cyprus. He was deathly afraid that the new government would seize it from him. And they were beginning to do that. And he had to find a way to protect himself. And all of a sudden, lo and behold, Obama appoints the point man who's batting 0.000 batting average, is appointed to give him a chance to get out of his slump, I guess. They appoint him point man for Ukraine. He's supposed to do 2 things. He's supposed to dole out the billions that are going to need it to keep Ukraine going, because when Yanukovych and his pro-Russian oligarchs, crooks, and organized criminals, including the guy who turns out to be the Biden's partner, flee, I'm told they left $800,000 in the bank. I mean, Zlochevsky took 5. The guy who ran the bank, Kolomoisky, took 12. The president himself, Yanukovych, took about 15. They laundered this over a period of time. So the guy is deathly afraid that his business is going to be taken away. They're going to seize his money in all different parts of the world. There's nobody to really protect him within Ukraine. It's taken over by a new government. Poroshenko becomes the president. At that point, they actually think Poroshenko may be honest. Boy, that turns out to be wrong. And so he's got to have somebody. And all of a sudden, Biden comes on board. Biden's the perfect guy. Obama gives him control over all the money going to the billions of dollars that Ukraine's going to need to survive. Joe Biden's in control of it. So he's given the job of distributing that money effectively. He's given the job of reducing corruption in Ukraine. And he's given a job to help the Ukrainians against the continuing Russian incursion in the Ukraine. I don't need to tell you, he failed in all those, right? Didn't stop the Russian incursion. In fact, he wouldn't even give them shooting weapons. So basically, under his regime and Obama's, the Ukrainians were fighting for their survival with slingshots. The weapons were supplied by Donald Trump so that the Ukrainians could properly defend themselves. He also failed in reducing the corruption in Ukraine because he set up one of the most corrupt deals imaginable, which every Ukrainian knows about, and just about 90% of the American press covers up. And it's the following. Zlochevsky decided the guy I got to buy is Joe Biden. And unlike the American press, he was very shrewd and not taken by political biases and hatreds. And he knew that Joe was for sale. Joe had been for sale for 30 years. So he made a deal. The deal was that he would employ Joe Biden's just thrown out of the Navy son, just thrown out for drug dealing. Nobody else would employ him. And his business partner, who was close to the Secretary of State, and pump pretty close to 80,000 apiece. They keep saying 50,000, wrong, 80,000 for each of them, which means 160,000 a month going to the Biden, John Kerry's stepson, and Devon Archer firm. So that's about $2 million a year to a guy that, would have a hard time getting a job as a doorman, given his history of drug abuse. So why was that money being paid to him? It's really clear. I mean, there's a text message that was put out with a lot of other things from the number 2 person in Burisma to him. And the text message says, "We're going to need you and Devon to use your influence." I have no influence. What's Hunter Biden's influence? I don't know, about the Drug Rehabilitation Center. Hunter Biden's influence is Joe Biden. And then he sets up a meeting, all documented by 8 text messages. He sets up a meeting with his father. This is a major, major development, the discovery of those text messages, because Joe Biden denied for years that he ever met with, talked about, or knew about Burisma until the very end. Well, he knew about it from the very beginning, because he knew how much he was going to get for it too. And he was there to protect Zlochevsky, to make sure his business wasn't seized. And when in the beginning of February of 2016, the prosecutor Shokin moved against the company, remember the Biden said there was no investigation? A lie. There's a document showing that the prosecutor Shokin seized the business on February 1st, and by mid-March, the prosecutor was gone. And Biden explains how. Biden explains in a really stupid, bragging statement to the Council on Foreign Relations or whatever it was. He tells them, "I told Poroshenko, you better get rid of that prosecutor or you're not going to get your $1.2 billion loan that you need to survive." Poroshenko objected, said, "You're not the president." I said, call him. This is like, Joe dealing with corn pop. And Poroshenko thought about it and caved in. And then from the other side of it, with the witnesses and the documents that we had over a period of several weeks, he fired Shokin. They say Shokin was corrupt. There's no evidence of that. Shokin was no more corrupt than anybody else. Certainly wasn't as corrupt as Poroshenko, Biden's friend. Poroshenko took hundreds of millions in bribes, went from being a millionaire to a billionaire. Basically, the theory about Poroshenko, and that's why he was defeated 70-30 in the election, was that he took everything and didn't move. He was the biggest crook that ever ran Ukraine, and a great disappointment to the people who thought he would revive it. But Joe hung in there with him, and so did our crooked embassy. They were behind him because he was letting them make a lot of money. So Joe does his deed. He gets the prosecutor fired. The prosecutor drops the case not only on Joe's son, but even more importantly, on the $5 billion thief who is able to come back to the Ukraine, keep his $5 billion, and keep his company. And that's why Joe got so much money. And that money, much of it was for Joe Biden. I'm going to very shortly explain how the money was distributed in all these situations. The final one we'll cover is the biggest one, and we'll cover it briefly because that's going to develop over the next couple of weeks. We know we've been able to analyze 2 specific situations in China. There are at least, conservatively speaking, 5 more business deals. Suffice it to say that from about 2014, 2015 on, the Biden family, one member or another or a group of them, have been business partners with the Chinese Communist government through the Bank of China, or with leading members of the Chinese Communist Party. So when Joe Biden took his son over to China on Air Force Two, Joe Biden went there again to help the United States, to have the Chinese move out of the islands they had militarized, and to give us some relief on tariffs and intellectual property. I don't have to tell you Joe failed, right? They expanded their military position in the islands, and they raised tariffs. Definitely in the newspapers at the time, so you don't have to take my word. Joe failed for the U.S. Hunter, however, did really well for the Biden crime family, because when Hunter returned to New York, within 8 days of returning, he got a letter from the Bank of China, who pledged $1 billion to his completely crooked private equity firm made up of him, John Kerry's stepson, Devin Archer, who's since been convicted of fraud, and Whitey Bulger's nephew. And nobody took any notice of it in the crooked Obama administration. And nobody raised the issue of this imperils our national security if the vice president is compromised like this. Who can ever separate then, since Joe failed miserably in negotiating with China on everything, and Joe made ridiculously stupid statements like China is no threat, and China are good folks, and China is not a competitor. He's the only man in the world that would say something like that. Is that because Joe Biden has been the dumbest guy in class from the day he went to school, Senate, whatever, plagiarized in law school, plagiarized as a senator? Is it because of that? Or is it because he was bought? I mean, it seems pretty logical that this is a bribery case. Now, if it stood by itself, I guess, well, but then when Joe goes out of office, China wants to keep their hold on the Bidens, and then they start a lot of business deals with them. And the business deal they do is a business deal for which I will show you some documents that are on the hard drive. They negotiate a deal. The deal is going to involve CEFC, a very, very large energy company in China, very close to the Chinese Communist government, eventually owned by the Chinese Communist government, and also considered somewhat to be a front for intelligence activities. And their leader, their boss, the chief, they refer to him as the chief here, the boss, is Xi Jinping, very well placed in the Chinese Communist Party and well known for intelligence gathering intelligence, coming up with sources, coming up with people to compromise. So here's what we have. We have a negotiation going on for a joint venture. Here are the negotiation notes. The joint venture is going to involve Hunter Biden, James Biden's wife, possibly other members of the Biden family, Gong Wendong, member of Chinese Communist Party but American citizen, Stanley Ho, very close to Jinping, his man in America, now, however, convicted federal felon, Devin Archer, another convicted federal felon, and of course Jinping, who is going to supply all the money. And here's a bunch of notes that describe all of the negotiations that went on. But the ultimate deal that apparently is reached is $30 million a year is going to be paid to them. I'm sorry, $10 million a year for 3 years for a total of $30 million. When the $10 million is recovered by Jinping in the deals, then everybody shares 50-50 partners. And then we have a breakdown of the partners, and the breakdown of the partners, which will be on another email, shows this very interesting 10% held by H for the big guy. If there's any doubt who the big guy is, well, then you just turn to the other email, which shows that Hunter Biden, when he was setting up the office for this company, which got started and they were paid money, he asked for a key for Joe Biden and Jill Biden. Now, what the heck are they doing there if they have nothing to do with it? Huh? And Joe didn't know anything about his son's farm business. He's co-located in an office in which his son partner is the Chinese government, the communist Chinese government. We want a president whose family is owned by the Chinese communist government, who never disclosed it to us when he was negotiating in the past? I don't think so. I do not think so. And then, if you want to know how the money was distributed, there's a very, very interesting summary text that explains, and for me as a prosecutor, this is gold, because I had a suspicion how this was done, because I had heard that Hunter paid for his half-sister's entire college education. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, usually the father and mother pay, and the son's a drug addict in and out of rehab, never really held a job. But of course, all this money for Joe was coming to the son, right? So I went back and I read Schweiker's book, and I saw the Chinese method of corruption. Give it to the kids, the brothers, the sisters. They take care of all the family expenses, and they kick a little back to the boss, as much as he needs. But it doesn't show. And that's why Joe and Jill have these beautiful homes, and no one can figure out how they paid for them. Well, I'm going to explain to you how you paid. This is a text, which I'm sure he wishes he hadn't written. It was the 3rd of January, 2019, so fairly recently. And this summarizes 30 years of practice. And this is to his daughter. And he's obviously in a bad mood. I love all of you, says Hunter, but I don't receive any respect, and that's fine, I guess. Works for you, apparently. I hope you all can do what I did and pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. Pay for everything for this entire family for 30 years. A guy who over that 30 years has been a consistent crack addict. Well, money wasn't for him. The reason he was paying for it was the money was for his father, to use his father's influence, to sell his father's office. Then he goes on, it's really hard. But don't worry, he says to his daughter. Unlike Pop, that's one of his names for Joseph Biden Jr., also sometimes Jr. But don't worry, unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary. That's the RICO scheme. From day one, you could substitute James, you could substitute the sister-in-law, you can substitute anybody you want. Unlike Pop, I won't make you give me half your salary for 30 years. What else do we need? We got a confession from Joe Biden that goes way back, that he demanded a quid pro quo. We have him lying about the fact that his son was under investigation. We've got this family, and by the way, there are 5 more deals with China that are going to come out. We've got him completely entangled with the Chinese government. The Chinese government has all the photos that are on that hard drive and a lot more. And they are, when you see them, if you ever have to really see them, I hope not. But if you see them, you'll see right away how they compromise the entire family and how they could be used to extort any president. Remember when the Democrats made a big deal of, the Russians have a file on Trump and they're going to use the file on Trump. They don't. The Chinese have a file on Biden. And you're going to see a lot of the file if you look at these pictures and text messages. And it is damn intimidating. It's the stuff of extortion. For a guy who's been lying and leading two lives, I guess from the day he plagiarized in law school. And I don't know, I was surprised originally at just how crooked the Biden family is. But let me just, in conclusion, make one general comment. I guess when you cheat in law school and you plagiarize to get through law school because you're the dumbest guy in the class and you were left back in the third grade, I guess it does show a defect of character, right? So his law school classmate introduced me to him and said, Joe's a nice guy. Actually, not true, it turns out. But Joe's a nice guy, but he's the dumbest guy you're ever going to meet. And he cheated his entire way through law school. Told me about the plagiarism. Told me he used to cheat on exams. All of a sudden, he's running for president in 87, 88, and he plagiarizes Neil Kinnock's speech and Neil Kinnock's life. And he has to drop out for that. And then I start reading about these little meaning hundreds of thousands, that James Biden is doing, and then the big deal with the bank where the son has a no-show job. And I start to think maybe Joe didn't get over that plagiarism from college. Maybe it is a character flaw. It did express itself when he ran for the Senate, but I never thought he was this big a thief. And I never thought he would sell out America the way he did. He's made us a laughing stock in Ukraine. When we talk about corruption in Ukraine, they talk about Joe Biden. And we got to be a joke in China if they have the files that I have. And boy, why are they working so hard to get him elected? Because they have him by you know what. This man is unfit to be president of the United States. He's too crooked. He has no concern for the national security of the United States, or he wouldn't have had his drug addict son involved with all these crooked foreign businessmen. He's a thief, a liar, and you got to see he's demented. You have got to see he's suffering from dementia. He can't do the Pledge of Allegiance. This is a cynical thing the Democrat Party is doing. Probably the worst thing the Democrat Party has ever done to this country, except maybe, to secede. It's got to be straightened out. The Democratic Party has become rotten to the core at the top. This doesn't mean there aren't wonderful Democrats in this country as good as Republicans, maybe some better, but they're being poorly served. There's an answer to this. The answer is vote him out of office. Big time. Let's elect Trump at huge numbers. Let's elect a Republican House and Senate. And you know what the Democrat Party will do? It'll go back and reform. That's what happens when the public speaks. It's happened to Republicans. It's happened to Democrats. It's the only way we're going to clean out these crooks. And I was told by a very reliable Ukrainian, if you open the door on this, there are going to be a lot of Democratic heads that roll in Washington. This corruption was not confined within the Obama administration to the Biden family. There are other families that are equally corrupt. I mean, we know about the Clintons. I can give you 3 or 4 more. And that's why they fought so hard to suppress this. And that's why they fought so hard to impeach Trump on false charges to get the focus off them. It goes back to the Brennan memo. She's going to invent a criminal charge against Trump to hide and take emphasis off the crime she actually committed. That's their modus operandi. That's the reason to vote him out of office big time. And when this gets fully investigated, this will arguably be the biggest scandal in the history of this country, certainly involving the most amount of money. Ukraine, China, Iraq, Russia, Romania, Kazakhstan. I haven't even analyzed some of the other countries here. But money involved in all of them, money going to the Biden family, kicked back to Joe on that pay for the expenses and 50-50. Well, thank you very much. And this was not pleasant to lay this out, but I believe this country is in grave jeopardy. This election could really do tremendous damage to the America we know. So please vote and make sure you deliver a message to a political party that has lost its way and can be straightened out, but only by a verdict from the electorate. Thank you very much.